Suresh, you need to keep your audio on so we can have some ambient noise so we can know if everything's working.
Can you hear me now?
Can hear you well.
Perfect. Thanks, Amelia.
Good morning, Suresh, Amelia.
Good morning.
Will you be driving the slides?
Yes, I will.
Excellent.
Thank you. Hey, Rich, have you sent out the slides, or do you want to take ownership when you present?
I sent you slides last night, but I can also drive it locally. That's fine.
Okay, sounds good. No worries. Thank you. Okay, I think we'll just get started. Thank you. Dan, I got your slides. Thank you.
Let me know if you have trouble accessing the slides I sent, and I can resend you a copy for the records.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
I also sent a second version early this morning that had a
Yeah.
one. Okay, perfect.
Yeah, Dan, I got it. It's uploaded already. Thank you. Thank you. Hi, welcome all to the Shmu working group meeting. This is like our first meeting. We just got chartered 2 weeks ago or so. I just want to throw up the note well. Most of the people I see are people who've been here quite a few times, and I don't expect you to really go over all this now. But it's there's a lot of details in here. But everything you talk about here, any contribution you make, is covered by the note well, and more details are in the links. So welcome to the Shmu working group. We are brand new, and it's about 2 weeks or so old, and we haven't had a chance to ramp up as much as we could have, right? And a lot of the drafts and everything, we are charted very close to the draft deadline. But it's very heartening to see still quite a few drafts came about, and a lot of items for discussion, and we really expect to get going after the meeting. On the mailing list mainly as well, to make some progress towards our deliverables. And at this point, the customary point, please asking for minute takers and Jabber scribes. The chairs will be watching the Jabber as well, but I would really like a minute taker to take some minutes collaboratively. If you can type in the chat.
Are the slides are uploaded? Because I'm not seeing them when I try and download them at all or anything.
So Dan York has made available the CodeMD link in the chat for people that want to contribute to the notes.
Do you want me to post a link to the slides as well?
I think that could be helpful.
Figure out whether or not if it's a bug in the data tracker or not is really my question. And we're off to a swimming start here. We have an expired draft and no materials uploaded. It's a great, perfect way to start how to do online meetings right.
Thanks, Colin. I can see that they're I'm actually presenting from there, so that's. Can you see it, Colin?
so that's great.
Thank you. Hey, and just like still looking for that minute taker, like Michael, can you like be one of the minute takers? Hate to call it on you. Thanks, Michael. Any other volunteers for minute taker? Sam, can you help out?
Who is B wrong?
And
Or Brong?
Oh, Braun, thank you. Thanks, Braun.
He just volunteered in the
Wrong
chat.
is pretty
Thank you,
much
Braun.
it. Yep, you're welcome.
Thank you, Braun. Thank you.
Sorry for not answering. I had trouble with audio. I'm not in the tool, so yeah, I'll let Ron do it.
Okay, thanks a lot, Sam. Thank you. Okay, so just to go over the deliverables in a very high level way. So first of all, just looking at the agenda. So like there's like some deliverables and status. I just want to go over like and recap like what are the deliverables for this working group, and then we have like 2 presentations planned for today. Like one from Dan, and Dan's like it's really like stuff he started like a couple of years ago, like when we were kind of pondering the effect of Zika on the IETF and so on. And there's like a lot of items that are pertinent in his draft, like that was like discussed in the mini couches list like a while ago. And Dan is gonna like do a recap of this whole thing. And then Richard is gonna present like technology requirements, like for like fully online meetings. Like there's no draft exists for this, but the idea is to like kind of start working on a draft after this meeting when we kind of have some kind of feedback from the working group on this. So skipping further, like we have like 4 major deliverables in here. So first of all is like the guidelines and principles for canceling in-person meetings and replacing them with fully online meetings. And for this, like Martin Duke wrote a draft. It just got published this week after the cutoff reopened. And so we can have discussions on that on the mailing list. Like Martin is like in a conflicting meeting today. So, but the idea is like really to try to have some kind of high level guidelines to say when we want to cancel a meeting and replace it with a fully online meeting for an in-person meeting. And the second item is like once we have a replacement online meeting, how do we go about planning it? Is there going to be like a 1-week meeting, like multi-week meeting, like what time zone it should be anchored in, and so on? That's really like for the meeting planning itself. And the third one is like kind of try to collect a bunch of requirements for like fully online meeting tools as well. And there's like Richard is going to present something, and there's also this virtual hum tool thing, but it's like very small piece of the puzzle really, but the draft exists as well. And this like had like quite a bit of discussion everywhere, but like just to point that it exists. And finally, like I thought like there'd be like more discussion on this, like in this, but to how to figure out like whether there's going to be meeting fees or not, and if so, how much it's going to be, and how are we going to set this, right? And this is like another important deliverable, but we have like no drafts, and like nobody volunteered to like like lead the discussion on this. And but that's something we want to kind of get going. A lot of the people said like, hey, the time zone doesn't really work for them in this, so or there's like a conflict, but like we'll get on it right after we like finish up this meeting. So if there's any questions about like any of these deliverables, like please get in the mic line. If not, we'll just continue with Dan's presentation. Go ahead, Wes.
Yeah, thanks. So one just point of order question. I think that these are absolutely the right next step for what we need to do. There's been some people, that have wanted to work on longer term, larger, kind of solutions well beyond the scope of this. So my question is really about the mailing list. The mailing list in the past has been, more open toward broader discussions and, future ways of thinking. I've been looking for, possible small research grant fundings to sort of, stand up some new tools that would be well beyond, what this is doing. Can we still use the mailing list for that purpose, or are we now restricting the mailing list to just the scope?
No, I think it's fine to go on the mailing list, and there is some kind of longer term thinking that's coming up in a second phase of the working group. So once we finish this deliverables, we are it's really open to see if we can go to more online meetings on a regular cadence, right? And that's actually called out in the charter as something we want to work on in the future. So absolutely, yeah, feel free to use the mailing list, and when the time comes, we can kind of go for a recharter once we have made some progress on these. Thanks, Wes. Okay, so I'm not hearing anything. I'll just switch to Dan's presentation. Thank you. Dan, floor is yours.
Sure. Okay, so next slide. Okay, so, or do you want me to drive these? It might be late. Okay, now we can just go.
Yeah,
ahead.
sure. Go ahead, Dan. Take it.
Okay. Okay. He says without having done the screen sharing before.
That's a good recipe, Dan.
You know what? Actually,
should work.
no. Why don't you just go ahead, and we'll just go through it. I don't want to spend time, waste the time on things here. Let's just go and do it. Okay, so I want to set the context for a little bit about what the questions that were raised a while ago. I should begin with one quick disclaimer. The Internet Society, who is my employer, Andrew did ask me to say that, explicitly state that the organization has no opinion about whatever is decided by Shmu or anything else. Nothing here will impact the Internet Society's continued commitment to support the IETF. This is truly a community decision, and ISOC has no opinion about that. And then, with the exception of that bullet, I am presenting as an individual IETF participant and do not speak on behalf of the Internet Society in any way here. So let's go on to the next one. So back, if you will remember, about 5 years ago, in 2015 and 2016, there was another global pandemic that was going on in some ways, although it wasn't really global. It was localized to pretty much Latin America and the areas that were there. Everybody was, a lot of people were stressed about Zika. Next slide. And in fact, one of our sister organizations was canceling or not canceling. They were relocating. Next slide, please. They were going on ICANN 56 and 57 were being moved to other parts of the world. And so a small design team met, started meeting. Stephen Farrell convened a whole group of people that would go and start to look at what would it be for to have many people sitting at home on many different couches. And that hence the name that you wind up with many couches. And the group actually met face to face at IETF 96 and 97. A couple of us met at IETF 98. And that's that draft, the expired draft, as Colin notes, that was there. Next slide, please. And that was where this came out of. So just to understand the context of where that draft was created. There were a number of the participants who were part of that. When Suresh graciously said it was my draft, it was my summary. I was the one who wound up summarizing a lot of the discussions that happened, but the discussions, the points, many of those things came out of this group of people and more who were there. Next slide, please. Which resulted in the draft, which has that wonderful opening line that says, this is currently a thought experiment. There's no current plans to hold a completely virtual IETF meeting. I just love that part of things. So the next slide, if we go on that, was this discussions went on, but then of course all the people involved we were all super busy. Things were going on. There was IASA 2.0. There's a lot of other different stuff that was affected things. So the many couches work really delivered many questions. And then in early 2019, Wes Hardiger, who jumped on here at the beginning, he and Ted Lemon and some others started to restart things and look at how could we think about longer term. There was a dog food, some different kind of stuff that was going on, and pieces like that. And now we, of course, have had this experience in 2020 as a community of IETF 107 and 108, which really comes into, in my mind, it's Shmu is sort of that answer to, we had raised a whole bunch of questions. What guidance can we provide to the IETF leadership, to the IETF LLC, and to the others who are involved around how we want to answer some of those various different questions that are there. So let's start with some of those questions and take a look at this. And Suresh, I don't know, do you want me to walk through this? Do you want people to come to the mic? How do you want to handle this from a flow?
Walk through the questions, and if people want to walk up to the mic, it's fine, or we can just take time as you need it, right? We do have a pretty light agenda, so it's okay to take questions if possible in the middle.
Okay. Then I guess if anybody wants to get in queue, you can do so when we get to some of these. All right. So there we go. So the first set of questions that the group confronted was really not the first, I would say the biggest one. Two of the biggest questions are this slide and the next slide. One is, what does the meeting structure look like? Just because we do it in a week in a normal physical environment, do we need to continue doing that? Could we spread the meetings across a longer period of time, multiple weeks, or does that make it too much of a demand on people who need to be in all of those? Do we need to exist within a certain set of hours? Do people like the 5-hour blocks that we've had this time? Could we spread it out more? Is that, again, how taxing is that on the people who want to participate? We've done, as we've done here today or this week, we've done multiple sessions at the same time. Is that part of it? Do we look at something else? How long do we meet? These are some of the questions that were being raised, and I think these are part of what the community needs to provide the guidance on, and it's part of the Shmu process is, what does that look like? I don't know if anybody wants to say anything on this or if I'll keep going. Alyssa.
Thanks, Dan. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, so just while people are thinking about this, there's one thing I wanted to point out, which is the advantage of having guidelines developed for these questions about especially the timing and the length of the meeting and so on, is that we can capture some of the concerns around sort of the fairness or the distribution of the timing across time zones. So if we always drive the timing decisions based on survey, then it's like a majority rules. So you end up with clusters of people between Europe and North America, where you find the time zone or even the length of the meeting will favor the majority, and then our participants in Asia kind of get the short end of the straw if we do it that way. And this is something that came through in the survey that we did after 107, because we didn't have very many sessions during the meeting week itself, and then we spread out these interims. Lots of people loved that, but because the interims just get scheduled based on the decisions of individual working group chairs, a lot of them ended up being clustered within basically the 14 UTC, the 2 hours after that. And that disadvantages people for whom 14 to 16 UTC is not a convenient time zone. So I just wanted to point that out, that this is the advantage of writing guidelines, is that we can address some of those things as opposed to if we just drive it with survey all the time.
And I would also point out that the time zone question is the next slide, which is the big, gnarly, terrible one. But I think if there are questions, I see people in the chat asking if there are comments or questions around this. I think my understanding, what Suresh, what I believe I'm asked to do is to help drive these questions and help solicit some of this so that we can start to get this guidance, which will ultimately feed into the outcomes of the Shmu group. So please feel free to ask questions or get in queue if you wish to. And if not, we'll go on to the next. Oh, there's a queue.
So I'm letting in Adrian Farrell now.
Hi. Yeah, thanks. I think this is a nice list of questions. I'd be really interested to know people's experience with agenda conflicts this time round. It seems to make good sense to have multiple sessions happening at the same time, but only when that isn't causing people to have to be in 2 meetings at once. And there's more of a temptation to do that with online meetings than there is with physical meetings. And my brain is frying because I'm currently in the Tees working group as well. So thanks.
So, Adrian, if I can get you back on the line, like, is your thinking that we should have more or less like parallel tracks like than we do in a physical meeting in here, or is just something you want us to watch out for?
I'm not really sure whether more or less is the right answer. But I'd like to hear people's experiences this time with conflict to see whether people have still got the same conflict issues and therefore we should have fewer parallel tracks.
Yeah, and Jay like kind of has like a meeting survey, like a detailed meeting survey from last time, and I'm pretty sure like, you know, there'd be like something like that too, and I think it was like one of the most answered surveys of all time. I think we'll get like some kind of answers from that, Adrian, and like, yeah, that's a really good point.
Okay.
So maybe if people have comments on that, they can place themselves in the line, and then we can move on to Andrew Campling now. Except you're going to have to also start your mic.
Hi, hopefully you can hear me okay.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, so just quickly running through your helpful list of questions, Dan. And this is obviously my personal perception, others will differ, I'm sure. My preference is that it's structured over a week. It's a real pain to try and track virtual meetings stretching several months hence, and it's easy to miss them. So I don't think that's conducive to getting more engagement that way. So I think actually having it as an event rather than just a widespread set of meetings is far, far better. I think doing it over a course of 24 hours is an absolutely hopeless idea. So pick a time zone for a given meeting in anticipation of your next slide, and structure a working day for that time zone. For what it's worth, I think the 5 hours that this meeting is pretty good, actually. Having multiple sessions like we would do for a face-to-face meeting, I think is perfectly fine. There's going to be some conflicts, but that's really down to the meeting chairs when they put in for their scheduling requests, making sure they indicate what they shouldn't be scheduled against. So that's down to the working groups to handle that as it would do for a normal meeting. Yeah, I think I've covered the next one, which is sort of 5 hours or so seems like a good amount of time. Maybe you could extend it a bit by scheduling some social events, but I'm not sold on the Gather Town thing. I think there could be meetings like this, which could be deliberately set up as social events. I guess many of us I think will be well used to having social events on Zoom, for example, and trying to maybe replicate that within MeetEcho would be a good thing. If the flexibility in MeetEcho would allow such a format rather than just this sort of slides sort of meeting type format. Anyway, those are my views. As I say, I'm sure others will have different conflicting views, but there'd be no fun if we didn't. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew.
Oh, so the video is working. MP not found. Never mind. So for me, the meta question I think is the most important one in terms of how are we trying to figure out what is best for the overall community, as opposed to just the individual opinions of the people active here. and are, you know, contributing to the process, because I, for once, am pretty sure that whatever my own opinion is, isn't probably reflective of the majority of the community, nor likely the majority of the people active here, right? So whatever we do, you know, surveys seem to be, you know, painful, but a good way to reach out to the larger community to get broader answers to these questions.
Yeah, a good point, Tolos. I think like once we have like some kind of early form of drafts, like for the deliverables, like I think we can do some kind of publicity on the IETF discussion list as well to get like a broader community. But we are not at that point yet. Like when we have something, even like, you know, as a base point to start sharing.
So I think we had a survey. There was a preliminary survey already made by the executive, and Jay Daly might be presenting some of his preliminary results from that later today, if I understood correctly. But it's coming, and there can certainly be more surveys, I expect.
Or just you know, on the importance of, you know, just because they're painful, they're more work. Just let's remember we're trying to maximize the number of people in the IETF, especially those that are not here on this call. For
sure. Thank you very much. I will let Richard Barnes into the queue. That's a comment. Let's see if I successfully.
Good morning, folks. I assume I'm audible here. I'll just throw a couple bits of quick anecdata in here. To Adrian's question about conflicts, I didn't personally have any issues with that. I haven't heard folks having conflicts. I think we got a good balance with the slots we had of getting things that didn't conflict. On this question of whether to have a consolidated or spread out week, I'm a bit split. That was impressive. I'm a bit split on this consolidated week question. On the one hand, it made it easy to reserve time, and take time away from other stuff, because you could just block out some time in the schedule. And as Andrew points out, that would be a lot more challenging with a spread out schedule. I will point out that for a couple of the groups I was involved in, the lack of flexibility in scheduling led to us not being able to have basically all of the major contributors to the work. And so we ended up having a pretty, a slot that we basically used for informing the broader IETF community and not getting real work done. So it was less valuable.
Okay, thank you. Then it's Ted Lemon.
This time. Wow. Echo cancellation not working. Let's see if I can survive this. So what I wanted to talk about was, oh, this is horrible. Okay. Sorry. I'm hearing everything that I say like with a 1/10 of a second delay, so it's really hard to talk.
Maybe if you take off your headphones, because you sound fine to me.
Yeah. Let's see. How about now? Okay, I can't hear myself anymore. So what I want to talk about is that there's a certain lack of thinking outside of the box that I think we wind up doing because we're so used to doing our meetings in person. We have this formula that we use that has really worked well for us in the in-person meetings. And I just like to encourage people to think a little bit farther outside of the box than what's been discussed thus far. When we talked about doing the meetings over the course of 24 hours back in 2019, the idea was not that we would just spread the whole schedule across 24. Well, that was one idea. It was just spread the whole schedule across 24 hours, and good luck to anybody who has to get up at 3 in the morning to show up for a meeting. But actually, my friends in California right now are getting up at 4 in the morning to come to this meeting, so it's not that weird. But what we actually talked about was what could we do differently that would make it possible to meet in an effective way across a 24-hour spread over the course of, say, a week. And one of the things we talked about is could we have people sort of show up sporadically as opposed to in like concentrated like multi-hour sessions So for example, suppose a working group has like 10 working group items. Each of those working group items, the people that want to present on those working group items could actually just like pre-record a presentation and make that available. And then we could say, okay, at a certain time, we're going to have a discussion about this. And let's have everybody who's interested in that discussion or who thinks they might just show up to see what's going on, sign up, and we'll pick some times. Like we'll pick a time at like 4 in the morning California time, and another time is at like say 11 in the morning California time. And people who can show up at 4 a.m. will show up and have a discussion. And people who can show up at 11 a.m. will show up and have a discussion. We'll note those discussions. Convert after that where you get to talk to each other because they weren't awake at the same time. The notes that were taken for those conversations get sort of harmonized, and maybe we have a wrap-up session where anybody who feels like they didn't get heard or wants to participate in a discussion with somebody who wasn't in their breakout, they can show up. And so, I mean, I'm outlining something here that's very researchy, but the point is, like, if we actually want to succeed in meeting online, I think we really do need to think outside the box, because we have the availability, like the tools we have available to us are much better than what we have if we're meeting in person, or much different. Maybe better isn't the right word.
Yeah, I mean,
in person,
you raise the right points.
No,
you raise good points, Ted. I mean,
Dan's lips moving.
Oh, but you don't have your headphones in, so you don't know that I'm speaking. So I think you raise excellent points. We need to think outside of the time frame, and I think that's the question really: is what guidance does the community want around that? Does the bulk of our community want to stick to the event week kind of format? Do we want to think within certain, and this comes into the time zone issue as well, but what structure is it? I mean, I personally did find that the 5-hour block was useful in that I could just plan that was the time when I was going in there into IETF world. And then I could know that outside of that is when I would be able to go and work with that. But it's an excellent question to ask. And I think it's the right one is, are we constraining ourselves by thinking about how we did things in a physical way when we do have this flexibility in certain ways? How will that impact us outside of it? I would suggest for the question of, for the sake, I know Suresh, you told me to take as long as we want. I also realized that on each of these, we could go deep. So I would encourage people to think about, are there major points or questions that that would help express opinion or help drive the development of guidance around these? Whoever's next, oh, Wes.
Yeah, I'll let Wes Hardiker.
Oh, sorry, Amelia, I forgot you're driving this. I'll back up.
That's fine. No, it's.
Well, I'll keep this a little bit shorter because Ted just pretty much said everything I was going to say. But I actually thought that this week worked really well, and I think that this charter, as I said, is sort of the right next baby step forward. But Ted's right that we need to solve the how do we readjust our world given that we have to do it now. Whereas the discussion that Ted and I started again, a while back was about the bigger problem, because both of this slide and your next one on time zones are really both tied to the larger question of how do we make interactive meetings work? And it misses the bigger question of, are there better ways to interact than, sort of virtually meeting? Meetings are one mechanism for getting around the higher bandwidth over email, and are there other ones that work? Unfortunately, that's sort of hard research, but we need to think about changing the way we work. As an example, one of the things that I posed as a problem question is, what would it take to make all the working groups meet 100% of the time for a week, right? 24/7. Completely think about our structure and what would it need to make that. Thanks.
No, and that's excellent. That's exactly right. We're at the current point with the questions we're asking are, how do we really revolve around how do we replicate the experience of an IETF meeting, whereas there may be other ways to solve it. Mark.
Hey.
The floating head.
Yes, indeed. So a lot of globes. That's a lot of globes. So structuring the meeting over a week makes a lot of sense when we're all in the same place. We have the serendipity of the hallway meetings and all the extra breakout sessions, and I need to go and pull that person into this room for this discussion, and everybody's kind of on the same clock more or less. and you get a lot of value out of that, I think. Excuse me. I don't see that value in this format that we're doing this week. You know, it's highly disruptive to some people, not at all disruptive to others. People are on different schedules. You know, when you look at the schedule, I don't know if my slot is going to be at 2 in the morning or at 9 at night until the agenda comes out. And so that affects, you know, how you schedule things. You have conflicts potentially. You don't have any of the serendipity. I think, you know, if we want to optimize for people who want to go to lots of meetings because they're professional IETF people, it might make some sense. But if we want to optimize for getting the work done and getting broad participation, you know, as a working group chair, I look at this and it just looks like all downsides. Everybody's tired by the end of the week. People are on different schedules. I don't know when my slot's going to be. It makes a lot more sense to go and schedule interims where we can accommodate the different participants and have a more reasonable slot length, and maybe have multiple slots in the same week, or however we want to spell it out, and have fresh people who, you know, it's not as good as in person, of course not, but I don't see any upsides to artificially putting all of these different sessions in one week. And from, you know, the standpoint of being halfway around the world, frankly, I don't want to do a social event at 3 a.m. Sorry, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Understood,
now, if there's
Mark.
a financial constraint here, if the LLC needs a revenue stream for the meeting to be replaced somehow, let's have that discussion. But we need to understand that constraint. And frankly, I don't want to feel like we're just holding these things because we need the revenue stream. I will continue to consider not scheduling meetings during these weeks if you know,
I would hope.
I have these doubts.
We have quite a few people lined up, and even though our agenda was initially very light, I can see this in order to allow as many people as possible to speak, we might want to move on, like collect a few comments before we get back to you, Dan, if that's okay by you.
Sorry if I'm too negative.
Yeah, Mark, just one point is, like, you know, like we are specifically chartered not to, like, you know, revisit the financial model in this group, okay. But like your point is like very well taken. Thank you. And Amelia, if you can cut off the line, like, you know, make sure nobody else new gets in, and then we just like exhaust the queue. Would be good.
Okay, very good. So next up is
while Sam's coming on, or Alysa's coming on, I would just note too, Mark, there were many comments in there that said, you know, well, yeah, why do we need to meet in a week? Why could we not just have the working groups, you know, meet in an ad hoc fashion that worked with them? And that's a valid question to ask. Alyssa, go ahead.
So just seeing the length of the queue here, it's great for people to share their opinions, but what we really need is people to write this down in the format of guidance to the IETF leadership. So, I mean, it's fine if people want to kind of discuss what their preferences are, but that's not the ultimate goal here. So I would encourage anybody who's gotten into the queue to become a draft author in this working group, because that's what we really need, not just your opinions about what you'd like to see as part of the structure. And just to respond to the question about surveys, I didn't mean to imply that we were going to stop surveying, because we did a big survey after 107. We're going to send out a survey shortly after 108, which is going to cover a lot of the same ground. But if all we have is surveys, then our decision making is naturally driven by the majority. And there's some concerns, as we've been discussing, where reflecting minority opinions would be very useful. So we're definitely going to keep surveying, but it's not the only tool, and that's why we need the guidelines.
Absolutely, thanks, Alyssa. Like I think it's like really you hit like, you know, nail on the head, right? Like, you know, we need to get the draft authors. It's like in the next steps, like, you know, the goal is to like identify somebody to start like codifying this, so we can have a structured discussion, right? Because even already, right, like, you know, 10 minutes into discussion or so, like, you know, we already see like contradictory opinions, and so we really need to like make progress on that. Thank you.
Right. So Ted is next.
This is Ted Hardy speaking from Google, and I wanted to add 2 questions to this list that are about meeting structure, that are about the cadence of things that happen before and after the current meetings. So right now there is a draft deadline, which occurs before the meetings, and there are exclusion zones before and after the meetings for interims in the common case. And I would like to add to this, like, is it still a good idea for us to have a draft deadline, given that we may be changing the meeting structure in other ways? And add as a question, is it still a good idea to have exclusion zones for interim meetings related to these meetings? And I think those are questions that might help us start to think about not just what happens during the week of the IETF, but how having a week of the IETF influences the cadence of other work. And I think that's part of what we need to start thinking about if this is going to be online only for a significant period of time or permanently. Thanks.
Yep. Yeah, and in fact, the deadlines question is asked in 2 slides, but it's an excellent one. Mallory.
Can you hear me? Great.
Yep.
Sorry again about the audio earlier. That's embarrassing. So I just wanted to say that for this week, it has actually been really useful to see how it worked, because it's very different than how it worked at 107. And so I agree with doing a survey now. And also it may be why there aren't as many, well, hardly any drafts for Shmu. It was useful for me anyway to see. One thing that I noted that is that a lot of working groups ran out of time. And I just feel like that shouldn't happen when we're meeting virtually. It's going back to the list. I mean, things should have been in the list. I think we need to, this speaks to the earlier comments about changing how we work. And I'm wondering, I mean, I know we have a lot of mailing list experience and etiquette in the IETF, but I was hoping to make a bit of a contribution around how to use mailing lists like asynchronous time-bound meetings to get things done outside of a face-to-face or an interim or an online meeting. I just was surprised at the volume of meetings that ended with, we didn't get to nearly enough of our work in this.
Yep. Yeah, good one, Mallory. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that would bring us to Charles Echo.
Yeah, hi. Charles Echo, Cisco. I wanted to mention a couple of things in the context of the hackathon, because I think it's a good example of other things we need to think about. The hackathon is one of several things that kind of opportunistically cling on to the meeting schedule and happen in the context of a meeting. When we think about switching to virtual, the hackathon and many of these other things kind of have the same type of experience where you could work on code related to IETF work throughout the year, and many people do. But there's something that was very helpful about people coming together all at the same time, agreeing to those times roughly, and then having a really concerted, focused effort. And that's what the hackathon did opportunistically over the weekend before the IETF meeting. And this time we tried the whole week before. And we certainly need to continue to experiment and alter it. But I do think there's some value in set times, because people can't, we all work on everything throughout the quarter or in between these meetings, but the set time helps. And just to think about things like the hackathon, other things that typically happen opportunistically the right or before what we think about as the regular IETF week. When we meet face-to-face, we need to consider those too as we think to switching totally virtual. And
Absolutely.
happy to write something up.
I was about to say, could you write something up? Because I'd be very curious to know about your experience. I mean, I'm with you on the point of a meeting week or a designated time is that deadlines do help motivate people,
Right.
or when you're getting together with people, when you have to present something, when you do something, deadlines do matter. It would be great if you could write that up.
Yeah, we'll do.
Okay, so that would bring us to Colin Jennings. Thank you.
Good morning, Colin Jennings. So I want to hit the back, the not try and just solve it with everyone's opinions here, but just sort of back up to the meta issues. And, one of the meta issues is though the IETF often seems to think that it would be good about thinking out of the box and designing something completely new, it's actually not our skill set. There are a lot of researchers who work in this area. There's a lot of things. And I think that what this working group should be doing more than trying to imagine something completely new, which they have no resources and no ability to actually test or do the user human factors research to see if it works, is look for things that actually are working. I mean, there's, you know, millions, literally millions of people right now trying to come up with better solutions to this type of stuff. Yeah. Now, a lot of the suggestions I hear about the async models, yeah, you know, like, geez, I could record my opinion ahead of time and give it to you enough that you could review it beforehand, and then we could send, you know, asynchronously discuss it. Does this sound sort of like submitting a draft and like sending email to a list or something, maybe? Okay. But the point of these meetings is to have these synchronous real-time conversations. Yeah. We have and now you could argue our async stuff is insane. That we look at other organizations, some of them are using, they submit the pre-comments ahead of time via video versus 72 column ASCII. I mean, that's a reasonable discussion to have, but we should do it by pointing out this is working. We should also get really clear about the type of things we're trying to optimize, what success looks like. I hear lots of comments about, you know, this week went well or this week went poorly. I think it went complete shit would be my feeling of how it went. But that's, you know, obviously opinions vary, but what are the metrics that we use to measure those types of things? And this is where we come around to, you know, should we try, like, you know, should we have lots of interim meetings and no regular meetings, or should we have regular meetings, right? And so my observation is that the metric that I think is really optimized by a meeting like this week, where we try and put lots of meetings in some time block, is people work in working groups other than the one working group they come to. It tends to favor new participants. It tends to give people not a voice. The working groups that run strongly by just having lots of interims, which is where they make all their important decisions, tend to have a very narrow set of key contributors who more or less have a veto over everything that happens, and most new people don't participate. There will be new people, and I'm not saying there won't be a new person coming into them, but they tend not to have that, and those new people don't tend to spread out across other groups. It's very hard to break into one of those types of circles, where you know, so again, if what we want to optimize is I have one protocol I want to get done, what's the fastest way we could get it done? I can tell you the answer right now. Yeah, run meetings with no more than 15 people in San Jose time zone. That is the fastest way to success. Right? Now, but if you want to build a large technical community that builds something with the type of broad consensus that the IETF generally goes to, that's not the right thing. So we need to get, you know, this working group needs to discuss what it's trying to optimize and what's the metrics. We need to not invent things. We need to go bring examples of things that are working from other places and say, let's do that. And we know it's working because we saw it work somewhere else. You know, every idea worth trying is being tried somewhere. So go try it. Thanks.
You're welcome. And you raised a super big point. And actually, that was the last slide I put on here, is right now, everybody in the world is trying different kinds of techniques for virtual conferences and virtual events, virtual meetings, virtual things. I think it would be, if we can go out there, look at what's happening, see what's happening in the rest of the world out there, and learn from those examples, bring them back here, write them up, you know, help contribute that kind of thing to share that with other people. That would be huge, because you're right. You know, there's a lot of this experimentation happening all over because everybody's trying to solve this problem.
Right, so we have still one person in the queue now, John Clanson, and then Samuel Byler seem to have fallen off the queue. Is that because Samuel no longer wants to make a contribution, or was it a mistake?
Yeah, just like stop with John, and then we can go back to Sam later.
Yeah, okay.
Thanks, Sam.
So, John Clanson, you're up.
Yeah, this is going to be miraculously brief. I strongly agree with everything that Colin just said. Thank you, Fluffy. But want to add one more thing, which I mentioned in the chat, which is that we need to keep in mind that one of our strengths has always been cross-area review and cross-working group review. And anything we do, unless we're going to give that up, anything we do with regard to meeting scheduling and spreading things out needs to concentrate on preserving that rather than making things much more efficient for the, as was just pointed out, relatively small number of people who are participating actively in a particular working group, and often doing that by virtuals, which actually violate our rules about decisions on mailing lists. Thanks.
Thank you, John. So let's go on to the next slide. And in light of the fact that we also do want to get to Richard's presentation about stuff, maybe let's perhaps take any kind of key comments. And this next one would be one I would love to see people write some drafts about or with opinions about, because this is really the kind of the key issue. Do we schedule all of our meetings to make Mark Nottingham get up in the middle of the night and be a floating head? Or do we schedule them at times that, make others of us get up in the middle of the night? Or what do we do? And this was perhaps in those earlier discussions that kind of the almost unsolvable issue, which is, do we continue to do what we do with face-to-face meetings and move them around the world such that they are, equally inconvenient to people at different times? This goes back to that meta issue of what is a meeting? Do we need a meeting? What are the points around that? And, there was the question raised around should working groups, choose a time zone that worked for them? But then to questions that Colin raised and others pointed here too, how do you make that welcoming to newcomers? How do you do those kind of things? I don't know there's an easy answer to this one. I don't know that we want to take another half an hour to talk about this, but we could. But I think this is something that the group needs to spend some focus and time on is what's the right guidance to the IETF leadership around this if we continue with the current kind of model where we constrain this. And I see people in the queue, including Mark.
So Samuel Weiler is back in the queue. So I will let you speak, Samuel.
Thank you. To John's point about cross-area review, I'm going to suggest something heretical, and I would love feedback, particularly in Jabber. What would it help us to, acknowledging that there is point to that cross-area review, separate that from the sessions in which the people actively working get more done, and actually plan, here's the tutorial for people who are kibitzing, versus here's the discussion for people who are writing code in this area. I'm sure each working group would do that differently, but I wonder if we should look at that as a set of options. That's all.
Okay. I think I will say from Suresh and Amelia's point might be send text. Mark.
And Mark, you're up.
Yeah, that was a really good point, Sam. Thank you. So time zones, I have some experience in this. I think it's possible. It is. I'm still surprised that we have IAB meetings that are covering all the participants and causing some amount of pain to most people. I don't know if you've seen it. We have the meeting pain calculator, which Martin Thompson put out, and then I refined a little bit to help you calculate how much pain a meeting time causes for the participants. I think if you have the ability for the working group to identify its participants and identify what the least painful time is for that working group, you have a shot at it. If you make it a big one block, everybody has to be in these times, it's almost impossible. And I think that sharing the time for or sharing the pain for a 1 week block of meetings is just, yeah, that's where we're at right now. So that's again why I think that the 1 week block is not a great approach. If people want to talk about rotating times to share the pain, I've been in groups that have tried that, and my experience is that it ends up confusing people a lot more than helping. Also, if you can make the meetings a little more spread out rather than every week or every, or for long periods of time, that helps as well. But yeah, it's possible.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you. So that will bring us to Jeffrey Jaskin.
I just wanted to register a vote for trying to support people outside of U.S. time zones. My impression is that having like solid meetings that ask people to time zone shift is a good idea for that. But I'm sure that there's research and evidence from other groups that have tried stuff that you should listen over my impression. Just pay attention to that.
Yeah, I think this is so I think this is a place where if people have comments to the list, if they have drafts, if they have ideas, this is really one of those that I think the leadership could use a lot of guidance on, because it is one of the more challenging ones. In light of things, let's go on to the next slide, which was what Ted Hardy raised earlier, which is that, do we keep the deadlines for agendas and drafts? Does it still make sense? Does it make sense to have the exclusion zone? Why are we doing that? Is it so that people can prepare for the meetings with solid, stable sets of drafts? Is it, do we need to continue with that? Does it make sense? Let's go on to the next slide as well. And just say there are all of these other elements that need to be factored into just thinking. Do we continue them? Do we continue to have plenaries? Do we continue to have tutorials, the welcome receptions, newcomers, all of those kinds of things? And as I will say, as somebody who wound up being participating in a newcomers meet and greet using GatherTown, that actually worked super well this time. I was quite impressed, and I actually interacted with a couple of folks later in the week as well. But so there are these questions I think we have to look at: is how, what is the guidance? Do we continue to offer these things? Do we continue to work with this? Go on, if you have a comment on this, feel free to put yourself in the queue. Otherwise, we'll keep going. Next slide is a side meetings question. And this came up in a couple times this time. Do we enable people to use IETF infrastructure, space, et cetera, to be able to have side meetings? In the face-to-face meetings, we've had a couple of rooms that people could sign up for and be able to use and get people together. Obviously, face-to-face, that's something you can do. You can have a barb off. You can do that kind of thing. We can't do that virtually necessarily. And so the question is, or in the same way, do we enable space for that? Do we allow people to do it some way? And this is a case of, what's the community sense of this? What guidance should be provided to the leadership? That is this something important that we should look at prioritizing in some way?
So there's a couple of people in the queue. Yeah.
Sure.
I'll let in Andrew Campling first. So Andrew.
Hi, thanks. That was the one thing I forgot to say earlier, so it's good that you've come to side meetings, Dan. That was the only thing I think was missing from the agenda this time round. It would have been good to have a scheduled space on the agenda for side meetings, because I think some have been scheduled in a very ad hoc way, but not using the IETF infrastructure. If there'd been a time slot reserved for them, maybe spread over the week like they normally are, in my view, that would have been much better to do that. So I'd definitely vote for side meetings to be supported if possible.
Okay, thank you. Alyssa also has a point.
Yeah, just another thing for people, all those people out there who are going to go home and write, who are going to sit at their desks and write drafts of guidelines for us. This meeting, we, in part to Andrew's point, we chose a 5-hour meeting block and filled it with working group meetings. And it's obviously shorter of a day than we normally have at an in-person meeting. And we tried to be kind of strict about scheduling other things on the official agenda outside of those hours, because we knew that 5 hours of meetings per day virtually is maybe like a limit for some people. So that's why a lot of the other things on, the side meetings on this slide and the other events listed on the other slide, some of them took place last week. We were trying not to extend the day of each of the meeting days themselves, but that was just a guess. So if people have, a way to formulate guidance about that, that would be very useful.
And it was pointed out in the chat too, if you look at the difference between IETF 107, and where there were only a few meetings scheduled that were there, versus IETF 108, where we went much more to a kind of common things. Those are two different models. And I think it would be useful to people to consider those different models and say, which worked best? What kind of thing were there? Which is actually, if you go to the next slide, there was a question around that, which is, the multiple sessions simultaneously question as well. But, these are questions we need to talk about. What's the user experience? And I'm not going to get into the tools discussion because Richard's going to take some of that in the next part of things. Let's not go down that rat hole here. But that's the question. What is that experience like? What's there? And and again, it's for some people, one point of feedback was, if you're flying away, it's one thing, you can isolate yourself, you're traveling, you're going to a place, you're there, it's different. It's sometimes hard, and I think many of us have found that, to carve out the time blocks to participate in a remote meeting when it's virtual, when you're also at home, you have all the other kind of situations going on around there. Let's go on to the next slide. The question, a big one that was raised was the social side. Ultimately, a lot of what gets accomplished during an IETF week is building connections, building relationships, helping people find each other, work each other, discover, do that. How do we enable that? This time we obviously saw the experiment with Gather Town. Some people found that worked really well. Some people didn't. Some people didn't try it out. All those different things. How do we provide those kind of spaces? One thing I found that was interesting, a comment I heard from somebody, was that some of the social sessions, when they were set up, for instance, in Gather Town, like I did not participate in it, but I understood from a couple of people that the newcomers' coffee times were quite useful, because it was a time when a group of people all gathered in a place in Gather Town and lit up their video and audio and were able to talk to each other. So perhaps a point that might help with this would be to say, at this particular time, there'll be a coffee break when people can go to here and do this. Again, these are questions that would be great to have feedback on, drafts written, those kind of issues. Let's go to the next slide. The newcomers, I think that I would really commend the newcomers team. I interacted with both Karen O'Donoghue and Wes Hardiger and the others who were working on these different programs. I think they did some really neat stuff. I had some great feedback from a couple of newcomers. But it is a question. How do we make sure that we're providing onboarding, mentoring, other things? One of the interesting points of feedback that I had when I was in the newcomers meet and greet was some people said they were very excited about having this virtual meeting because it was the first time they were able to participate because of the lack of having travel fees and the ability to go and connect and from wherever they happen to be in the world. So I think it is important that we also just reflect in whatever guidance we give to the leadership, that we talk about the importance of, do we feel these programs are important? I do, but do we as a community feel they're important? And how do we work with that? Speaking of programs, Wes?
I also talked to a lot of newcomers that said that the only reason that they were here, it was really their first IETF, was because it was virtual and they could sort of for the first time. So, that's actually a huge advantage to bringing new work and new faces into the IETF. Wouldn't normally be able to travel due to budget and time constraint or whatever it might be. I will say that, with respect to, I think, so from the guides perspective, I had less people offering to be guides this time. So I think, there was a little bit less desire to be a guide virtually, unfortunately. We didn't actually get as many newcomer signups either, but I didn't go out and, knowing I didn't have enough guides, I didn't go out and really, ping as much either. I will say that the time zone issues are a much bigger problem. Instead of matching people by area, I matched people by time zones because that was more critical. Normally I would try and match people by area more. One last point, sorry, it is 5 o'clock in the morning my time. I've already been up for an hour and I'm groggy, but I didn't do some of the newcomers, like I didn't go to either of the newcomers' coffees for two different reasons. One of them was at 3:30 and I'm like, no. And I'm trying to help the newcomers and I just couldn't do it that morning. It was like the worst of the jet lag days for me. And the second one, I actually had a work conflict. One of the big things about, virtual meetings is that I try and do all of my normal work plus the 4 a.m. to 9 a.m. IETF work. And it's just a killer. So that's a personal choice that everybody has to make. But I think we do need to be aware that, we will try and double duty a lot because, we're not physically away where we say we can't do it. Right. And since everything's virtual, you can do everything virtual now. So you can just have meetings all day long like I did this week. So.
Well, yeah. And I think that was a point I raised a couple slides earlier on that point too, is it's not only challenging for us necessarily. If we fly to, Madrid, then we are physically there, our brains, everything else, our presence is there, and our coworkers know that we are away and focused. But in a virtual environment, we're not. we're not there. We have to both mentally focus ourselves, but also it's very easy to have everything else bleed in, and our coworkers don't necessarily know that we're away in that. The next slide is this behavior question. We have mechanisms that we've developed over years, the Ombuds team and other pieces for dealing with that. Is that also sufficient for virtual meetings? Do we need to do something else? Again, guidance, let's keep on going. The financial question, is we've already seen that here this time with the question around fees and waivers and pieces like that. What's the right financial model in a virtual meeting space? What do we need as the basis, as the floor to keep the organization going? How do we work with that? What are the roles of sponsorships? How do they work? We're seeing, one sponsorship right here in Meet Echo, right down at the bottom. It says hosted by Ericsson. Obviously that's, a nice sponsorship for them in that regard, and they get their name around there. But does it work differently? And also, what kind of investments do we need as an organization for infrastructure? And perhaps this will be something Richard hits a bit in his next presentation. But these are questions that I think we as a community have to come out with guidance. It does take money, infrastructure to run these, but what's the right balancing point in all of this? I see Andrew.
Thanks, Andrew.
Just briefly, just on the registration fees point, and ignoring whether it's financially viable, because I haven't got the numbers for that. For what it's worth, I thought the structure adopted this week was good. If I compare it to Black Hat USA next week, that's $1,095 for a 2-day virtual session. So for anyone complaining about the costs of IETF this week, assuming you paid the full rate, it's really good value. And I think there has to be some charge, because otherwise it implies it's not valuable. So I think with a good fee waiver system in place, the sort of the charge structure that's been taken on board looks about right to me.
Perfect. Thanks, Andrew.
All right, let's go on to the next one then. There was the legal question, I think some of which we've attempted to address at this event with the sign-in, the requirement of the data tracker login to ensure that everybody who participates, et cetera, has seen the note well as part of that process. But that was a question. Another question that had been raised was, what about privacy protections, for people who are participating in different ways, which goes to technical issues and pieces around that. Let's keep going. There were some other miscellaneous questions that had come up a number of years ago. Things like, there are other groups that sometimes meet in conjunction. They use the IETF week to have meetings in conjunction with the IETF. Is there opportunities for those groups to have meetings here? Again, it's kind of the side meeting question to a certain level. What kind of place? How do we go and work with that? There were the t-shirts questions. Somebody did, of course, raise the cookie question, but all those things are there. And then, of course, there's the eligibility for NOMCOM, which is a separate piece. So I think that concludes, because the technical security privacy, I'll leave those to Richard. And my last point was really just what I'd mentioned with Colin earlier. I think there's a lot of other stuff we can look at out there that's happening now. And I think the challenge on all of us, and I will give it to myself too, is to go out and look at the experiences that we may have and to help bring those back in here and document them, do what we can, so that people can get a sense of that. And I would just leave too that I would encourage people to think, if we could even just have a bunch of short little drafts that talk about people's experiences or help with some of this, I think all of that would be good input and data to have. It doesn't have to be some enormous draft that attempts to answer all of these different kinds of questions. All right, was that what you wanted, Suresh?
Yeah, thank you very much, Dan. Thank you for listening to this, and really looking forward to the drafts and everything, and we'll keep the discussion going on the list. But thanks for putting out this omnibus bill for people to look at, and thank you. Just if you have a few minutes for questions, if anybody needs anything, but I don't see anybody in the queue. So Richard, if you want to step up, did you want to share your own slides, Rich? Or Alyssa? Go ahead.
Alyssa.
Sorry, I can never tell if I'm sending audio or not. Were you going to ask specifically for people to volunteer to write drafts?
I was going to ask at the end of the
meeting. You're going to do it at the end? Okay,
yeah.
That's fine. Just want to make sure it happens.
Yeah, thanks. Colin, did you want to make a comment on, the last point?
So, Colin, I'm letting you in for video, but apparently not. Richard Moore?
No, Colin is like back in line. He's like popping on and off.
Yeah, so Richard Barnes also wants to present now, which I suppose is adequate.
Sorry, I was just getting queued up for the next topic.
Yeah. So because Colin appears not to actually want to make a comment, I'll just we're okay to move on, right, Suresh?
Yeah, like I think Colin is popping back on and off. So Colin, like whenever you get a chance, like get on, we'll get Richard queued up. Until then.
No, I don't want to make a comment. Sorry, it's just there's so much latency in actually pushing the talk button. It's like ridiculous.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
No, I don't know what.
I'm sorry, I just
Thanks.
removed you now. So Richard, if you could get back in line because you're the next presentation, that would be sort of helpful. And you're bringing your own presentation, right? Or yeah.
Yeah, I uploaded the presentation to Amelia, but like I think it's Richard. If you can keep control, I think it's good. Like to skip over the slides.
Yeah.
All right. So I think I've got audio and video.
I need to kill perhaps.
Yeah, there we go. That looks like it's working. All right.
Yeah.
So
I can see it
for people. So,
okay.
So thanks for the time, Suresh. This is some work I've been talking about with Mike Hoy from Mozilla, thinking about the IETF's requirements around chat and how we could kind of re-examine where we are with the Jabber XMPP stuff and see if it might be time to start thinking about moving towards something different. And if we are going to start moving towards something different, what would the attributes be of that different thing? So I think this group is chartered to do functional requirements. So this deck lays out some initial proposal for what the functional requirements might be, with the idea that if folks think this is a worthwhile piece of work, we could go turn that into an internet draft. I would just like to call out my collaborator here, Mike, who did a similar discussion of this in the Mozilla context as they were looking at moving from IRC towards something more modern. I think they ended up landing on Matrix, but hopefully we can draw on his experience to help work through this conversation. So by way of background, where are we today? I think we're pretty much all familiar with the Jabber systems that the IETF has used and tried to use for the last while. It's in a lot of ways served us well for a while. It's provided channels for real-time discussion in the background, largely as a secondary channel to in-person interactions. So didn't typically tend to see a bunch of use of this kind of outside meetings, kind of in between meetings or in between working group sessions during IETF meetings. So it was very much, I think, interested to hear from people perceive this differently. My perception is that it was largely used as a back channel for the working group session itself, and wasn't used a whole lot outside of that context. Isn't used a whole lot outside of that context. I think the benefits of Jabber are pretty well known. I mean, obviously it's based on open IETF and XSF standardized protocols, which means that you can have a whole ecosystem that gives you the ability to adapt the system to a bunch of different contexts. So you can have different clients on different platforms that have different features that adapt the system to different people's needs, and that's kind of nice both from an availability point of view and from an accessibility point of view in terms of getting it into different contexts where people need to use it. And of course, it's old tech and it has some old feeling edges to it, but it's one that people have gotten adapted to, and we have experience with it. We know how to use it. But I think it's instructive to look at how the situation has changed. The environment in which this tool is used has changed over time, and I think this shift toward more remote is salient here. So as more work is done remotely, these real-time chat systems are used more in a primary role than in the secondary role in the supportive. So they're more their own thing as opposed to supporting in-person interactions. And the usage tends to be more continuous as opposed to the occasional support of a working group session. I'm involved in a few working groups that have Slacks or wire channels or what have you, and do work more continuously in that way, as an addition to the email channels to use chat to drive the work forward. Kind of the flip side to the openness of the XMPP ecosystem is that ecosystem has not gotten a whole lot of investment in the last several years. And that's led to a few problems. When you try and get a Jabber clients, a lot of times you run into unsupported or abandoned clients. I think, for example, of the Adium client on Mac OS, which hasn't been updated in quite a while, has a bunch of open security issues that haven't been fixed. Kind of a side effect of that lack of development investment is that there's a lot of modern features that aren't present in the clients that do exist. One thing I'll call out here in particular is accessibility, which is accessibility in terms of the ability of people with visual limitations or other constraints to use a chat system, which I think is important in maintaining a real open community. Beyond just clients, there's limitations of the ecosystem itself. In order to participate in the IETF's Jabber systems, you need to have an account on an XMPP server somewhere. And the IETF wasn't offering this. So there's this question of where do I go for a Jabber account to start with? And that is increasing. These questions are increasingly coming up as we try and keep using this Jabber system. And there's also a bunch of stuff that has appeared in more modern chat tools, more modern features that just hasn't been backported to XMPP, either because of the clients aren't being very actively developed or because they require protocol support that isn't there. Just to call out a couple of examples, a lot of these tools have support for formation of dynamic related groups to groups related to a channel that exists. And there's a bunch of these things have tools for doing moderation. So both advertising codes of conduct, making sure people are aware of them, and providing tools for moderators to enforce those sort of codes. So the net results of all this is that it's, Jabber is a system that's hard for people to come into. They have to find a client, they have to find an account. And even for existing participants, you're not getting as rich an experience as you could be getting with more modern tools. So in light of all that, we want to kind of take a look at what the requirements would be for a system we would be adopting now. As a business course professor told me back in the day, a recommendation to hold is a recommendation to buy. So what would we be buying if we were doing this for an acquisition or a choice to adopt chat technology today? These were kind of the 5 buckets that we came up with of requirements. We've got details on these in the next couple of slides, but we have to have something that's functional, that helps us get work done. We have to have something that's open in that we can get people onto it, that people can come into the system. We have to have something that's accountable in terms of being compatible with our policies, both in terms of archiving and in terms of codes of conduct. We have to have something that's transparent, that supports the transparency that the IETF way of working. We have to have something that's operable in the sense of that it can be operated by the organizations that we have that run our technical infrastructure. So diving into those in kind of next level of detail. Functionality requirements, I think, are pretty obvious. We need working group group chats. We need ad hoc group chats for things like side meetings, breakout sessions, and we need direct messages so that people can talk to one another more directly and have perhaps group DMs as well, and things like that, so that you can have kind of flow and chat. Yeah, I think this, I just see Colin pop up in the queue. I think, yeah, we can, I was trying to decide whether to hold these clarifying questions, but yeah, I think we can, given how much time we've got, I think we can take discussions on these individual requirement slides. So yeah, Colin.
Okay.
I was just going to say, I think that we also should have requirements around search in these types of environments, and you know, there's a lot to be and persistent, right? I mean, Jabber sort of has persistence, sort of doesn't, but that type of issue I think has really helped get work done where you can find things.
Yeah, thanks, Colin. The search is a really good point. We do have some comments about persistence a bit farther down the deck and under another heading. Other comments on desired functionality here? Anyone want to really stand up for emoji reactions being a critical requirement? All right. So looking now at this openness criterion, I mean, I think when, sorry, Ron, go ahead.
Rana?
The thing that's really valuable is multimedia. Certainly being able to paste images in quickly is quite useful in chat. Having used systems that support that now, it is quite disappointing going back to a text-only medium.
Really good point.
And Alyssa Cooper wants to contribute also.
So this might be implied across these three, but if we wanted to mirror, you know, some of what we get out, some of the structures that we have in the IETF, you would want to be able to have group chats that are private, so not just direct messages one-to-one.
Yeah, I think that is probably implicit. When I think of direct messages, a lot of the platforms I'm used to using that phrase with have both one-to-one direct messages and group DMs. But yeah, I think that's worth calling out and making explicit.
So we're also having a very lively discussion in the chat currently. Jeffrey wants to make a comment and put himself in the queue. Jeffrey, please, you're up.
I will keep in favor of emoji reactions. They help reduce noise.
Thanks. No, I actually agree with that. They're just my favorite thing that seems frivolous about modern stuff, but is actually quite useful. All right, so openness. So in order for this thing to be useful, we need to get people onto it. I think what's one of the things the IETF prides themselves about is being an open community with pretty low barriers to entry. You know, all you need to sign up for an email list is an email address. We should have similarly low barriers to entry here. So yeah, well, as the first bullet said, we need this to work for everybody, like roughly at the same level as the email list. So the barrier to entry should be roughly, having an email address or something similar. Obviously, there need to be clients for accessing this system. I think all the browsers and mobile clients is kind of my table stakes. Obviously, this doesn't exclude things like native clients on different platforms. But given the that the web is not always well suited for asynchronous stuff like this on mobile platforms, it seems sensible to call those out specifically. Obviously, in order for this to scale, we're going to need some way for people to sign up without manual intervention because we don't have robust support staff to support this with administrative activities. And this fourth bullet here is this accessibility point. The IETF community includes people with various abilities, and we need to, support the tools that they need to participate in order to allow them to participate fully in this community as we are increasingly relying on these chat tools. And the last two bullets here really go to the supportive tools. I'll pause here in case people have comments along these lines.
Indeed, there's a comment from Wes Hardiker. So, Wes.
Hardiker. Don't forget licensability. So, if we're going to reuse some code base, we need to make sure that it's reusable forever. If we're going to, so the other one that I wanted to bring up at some point, so I'll just say it now, is stability, right? How how long are we going to keep this? We've been using XMPP for 20 years, but the rest of the world keeps shifting, social media constructs every couple of years. And I think, we need to think about, are we going to shift frequently, or are we going to pick something for a long time? So we need something that's stable and is licensable, even if whatever the base, company that's writing the code falls down.
Yeah, and I think the stability question is interesting, because I think we probably do have some aspects in which we need stability for archives and things like that. But that may not mean we need to stick to the same system for a long time. So I think we should probably have some discussion as we elaborate these requirements about exactly what dimensions of stability are important here.
So we have two comments from Andrew and Dan. Andrew Campling, you're first up.
Thanks. I'll be real brief. I just wanted to ask Richard, I presume you're aware that at least some of the requirements you've listed on the slide so far are addressed by the chat within MeetEcho, which I think you're possibly not a fan of, MeetEcho, from other list comments, but it might be worth you exploring that if you haven't already. It does certainly pick up on a reasonable percentage of the things you've listed as requirements.
Okay. Do you want to come back to that, Richard, or shall we let Dan York in the conversation first?
Let me just reply real briefly. I think there may be a need to capture another requirement here, because I think the MeetEcho chat, so I am not trying to be biased against the MeetEcho chat here at all, just to be clear. I think there's a pretty clear gap, though, and then I think what we're pondering here is something that exists independent of meetings. And as far as I know, the MeetEcho chat is focused on a meeting. So it may be that, well, make up both ways. It may be that we need to get a continuous, not just meeting chat that supports these requirements, but it may be that some of these requirements also relate to in-meeting chat to the degree that that's a different thing.
All right, so Dan York.
Yeah, I agree with you on the points that you had here, particularly the ones around accessibility. And I think, having an excellent user experience is really key, especially for getting newcomers in and all that. I would say, though, on a slide that we have on openness, I think we should put a requirement that where possible is based on open standards. And particularly, if it happens to be open IETF standards, even better. But I think when we look at this as a standards developing organization, where possible, we should have a bias toward solutions that use open standards in some way, realizing that's not always possible with all the other requirements that we have in here.
Yep, totally agree. I think I was more focused on harder requirements as opposed to desirables here, but yeah, definitely agree.
Yeah, thanks. I'll cut the mic line at Colin. Thank you. Go ahead.
So Elliot. Lear.
Good morning, Richard. Thanks for the presentation. I just have a question for clarification. Are you thinking about a service or a piece of software or a software base? By way of clarification, maybe you could say, how is it that Facebook groups doesn't solve all of this, for instance, or just pick one. Okay.
Yeah, I think what I'm imagining here is a service here with whatever software that entails. So, for example, XMPP entails a federation of servers and a collection of clients, people accessing it. Something like Facebook groups or Slack would be a more monolithic thing.
Okay, so also Colin has a last say in this particular conversation.
Yeah, so on the meta issue here, I think that on all of the stuff we're start talking about, the group should get clear about our feelings about dog food. So I'll be very clear. I 100% believe our tool, like all our decisions, not just about this tool, but all of our tools should be driven about what is functional for us. I could care less whether it used protocols that were aligned with the protocols we were trying to develop and build and bleeding edge. I think there's other places for that. Now, I know lots of other people disagree. I'm not saying that that would represent the community in the slightest. It may be that the community decision is the most important thing for us is to use all of our tools that we're developing, all of the protocols and tools we're developing. So obviously I'm highly biased towards open source, open standards type stuff, right? I prefer that. But in the end, I think our metric should be, does it let us get our job that we came to do here done? Not, does it use my favorite protocol that I've been working on? right? So I'm not trying to drive that discussion right now, but I think that that is one of the things that has stopped us from being able to make good decisions in the past, is we didn't agree on the community what our position on dog food was. So I think we need to get clear on that as one of the things this group should do.
Good.
All right.
So on accountability, I wanted to call out explicitly the tie to our policies for participation here. So the IETF has various policies that guide participation. We're all familiar with the note well. There's also the anti-harassment policy and a code of conduct. I think one of the things we should be looking for in these chat systems is tooling to support that. So when you, I think there's some requirements, I forget where those ended up here. Yeah, so there's some requirements I put under the transparency bullet here around having a first contact experience when you first come into the system to make sure you're aware of these policies. I think this is a pretty notable gap with XMPP, is that there's no on-join experience that tells you what the rules are for participating here. I guess that's, one might have assumed that was probably, in the context of a meeting chat, one might have assumed that was provided by the in-person meeting. But as we're more primary here, we really need to have the chat tools themselves providing that functionality. And then we need the tooling that is necessary for folks like the Ombuds team to put these policies into effect. So when there is harassment, they need to be able to reach out to folks privately, and in extremis, the ability to ban folks and constrain their participation. Pause here for a second if people have thoughts on this. Okay. Then around transparency, I mentioned the first contact experience. Obviously, I think one of the questions there might be some reasonable disagreement on is whether what the logging data retention policy should be here. One could imagine that you could view the chat systems as more ephemeral, that might not need indefinite logging like our email lists get. But in any case, it seems like we need some sort of logging here, probably, some sort of retention. And I think we do have a requirement, just kind of function as it came up in the functional thing. I think Colin brought it up, for having some degree of persistence here. So when you come into a space or when you come back to a discussion after some time away, people need to be able to see what happened in the interim and get the context, either for what they're coming into or what they're coming back to. Comments on these points? Do folks think we should log chats forever, or do people think they should be more ephemeral? Good, I got one bite.
Ben Campbell. Ben, I'll let you in.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
So I may be a dinosaur here, but email has always been my fossil record. It's kind of the core of my workflow. And one of the things I've loved is having email clients that do a good job of searching and finding things from years ago. And as more and more interaction with other people have moved to other, more less asynchronous mediums, I find that I lose that. And I suspect that if we had this magical chat system that everyone really liked, that we would find that a lot of our conversations would move from email to that chat. And I would be afraid of losing that same fossil record. So I think retention is fairly important. And searchability.
Okay, so Dan York also has a contribution.
As somebody who has been involved with helping with notes and minutes and stuff of working groups to help have a record of what was said, I think having access to archived chat logs is kind of critical because of that. And especially, I mean, like right now, there's so much great discussion happening in the chat log, and a percentage of that is getting brought over into the CodeMD minutes, but there's much more in that log. So I do think that having archived logs is an important component of it. I realize that we've moved as a society to where we have chatting that is there's much more ephemeral messaging or much more also kind of mundane. You know, we do a lot of emoji reactions. I mean, a lot of different things that are there that are not necessarily as is critical to have an archive of. But I don't know how you get an archive of the important points while, while not having the jiffies or whatever else. But I think that, there is an important part for the corporate retention of knowledge of decisions we made, of things we did, especially if we move more of our conversation into a chat platform to have archiving.
So Robert Sparks is the last in the line, and we've cut the line. So Robert will make the last remark, and then we need a few minutes at the end of the meeting to call for draft volunteers and some other admin trivia. So Robert, you're up.
So one aspect of a bunch of the messaging systems that we're talking about is that they allow one-to-one sidebars, small group sidebars. Mm-hmm. It's a pretty obvious answer on what our retention policy should be on the group chats. Is the answer the same for the one-to-one sidebars?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think the tools I'm aware of at least do allow for that, but I think it would probably be good calling out a need to have a different policy for DMs or sidebar conversations, vice public interactions. Yeah. All right. In the interest of time, I'll keep going here. This is the controversial slide, which I think I'll put up here. I think the stake in the ground I'd like to put down is, and this gets a bit beyond requirements and more into what we would expect the LLC staff to come up with. But I'd like to get a commitment here that we are not going to create something new here. Kind of going to Colin's point, we are a pretty small, pretty lean organization, and so we need something that can be built and operated with minimal. We're a pretty small, pretty lean organization, and building and running a chat system is that is functional for our needs is a much bigger task than we have capacity for. So we really need to focus on buying something and putting it into operation, configuring it to our needs, et cetera, and not building code and rolling our own here. In addition to that base constraint, which I expect we'll have some conversation on where exactly the bounds are on that. We obviously need to have admin tools for things like adding users, creating channels that go with working groups, say, in the same sort of alerting and banning stuff we talked about under the code of conduct heading. And obviously we need to scale out to certain limits, and we need to have security evaluations. I'm going to go ahead and flip through to the end, and then we can have some discussion on these last points. Couple of desiderata here. I'll defer. I'm not going to walk through these. People can scan through as I'm chatting here, and then these will be in the archives. And then we got a few candidates here. I've put some preliminary evaluations at the top, just to give folks an idea of where I think these requirements point. They probably point away from XMPP, also point away from a bunch of the corporate tools here, like Microsoft Teams and WebEx Teams. The kind of the most plausible corporate tool would be something like Slack, or these other alternatives where there's a kind of greater presence of open source and open standards-based stuff. Finally, the question for the working group here is should we do something here? Would it be useful to have, is there enough interest in reconsidering our decisions around chat, looking at new platforms, that we should have a functional requirements document and do it in this working group? And the other thing that would be useful for me and Mike would be whether we're, if we're going to produce a draft here, whether we're roughly on the right track.
Thanks. Todos and Carrie, please go ahead, and we'll cut your mic line after that.
I think we might actually just have to move straight on to doing the final administration things, because we got 2 minutes left of the meeting, and
okay.
As far as I understand, we have a 5-minute grace period after that, but maybe we can have further conversation on the emailing list, especially with requests to formulating requirements and use cases and such.
Sounds good.
I'm very sorry, and Carrie, for cutting you off like so.
I will also start a channel on the IETF Slack instance where we can keep this discussion going, because there was already some discussion on that overnight last night.
Perfect. Thank you. So like going back to our deliverables, like so we do have like 4 deliverables, and there's like not that many drafts. So like at least for the first deliverable, like for guidelines for cancellation of meetings, we do have a candidate draft that Martin Duke wrote. Like, it just got published earlier this week after the deadline. So I think we can continue discussion on that. And for the item for like the meeting registration fees and so on, I would really like some volunteers. Like Miria has volunteered to be one of the people to write a draft. If you're interested in being a volunteer, can you please type in the chat box, please? So the idea is there's like really like 2 prevalent views. One of them is like everything needs to be free. Another one is just like, hey, we need to somehow fund the meetings and all the activities like RFC editor and so on.
So interested in volunteering.
Thank you.
And
excellent, thank you.
Mallory wants to author a draft on asynchronous time-bound email meetings. Alexandra Petrescu volunteers for a list of tools. There's actually quite a lot of volunteers now in the chat. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, Charles. Yeah. So like pretty much like I think like we have like most of the stuff covered already, and Dan, I assume you're like willing to continue as well to help out with the the meeting scheduling as well.
So yeah, sure, I can help to a degree, but I would love it if somebody else wants to pick up. I have no ego that needs to say I need to be I'm willing to help somebody. I don't need to write it.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So looks like at least like we have some volunteers for everything. So we'll contact you offline after the meeting. So thank you very much for all your help, and thanks, Jonathan, as well. So we'll just put the authors together, and we'll try to get the early drafts out and continue discussions on the mailing list. So thank you very much for this awesome conversation and great discussions today. And we'll keep in touch with you on the list. Thank you. Alyssa, any last words from you?
Thanks, everyone. I think we had a good discussion, and yeah, please, those who signed up, please start writing.
Perfect. Thank you. Perfect. Thank you. And thanks, Dan and Richard, for leading the discussions through this. Thanks a lot. Thank you. Have a nice day, evening, or a really late night wherever you are. So talk to you all soon.